The Philadelphia night, once again lit by flames. Tuesday saw more clashes between police and protesters, with more blood spilled on both sides as people vented their anger at the death of Walter Wallace Junior. Some took the opportunity to indulge in looting, earning a stern rebuke from Walter Wallace Senior.
I don't condone no violence, tearing up the city, looting up the stores, and all this chaos going on. And I would feel like it's everybody having respect for my family and my son to stop this violence and chaos.
As security forces and protesters faced off, Mr. Wallace refused to blame the police outright, but called for justice for his son's death.
I mean, we got good cops and we got bad. That's the system in the system. I'm not faulting. Somebody had to be all accountable for what they did.
Walter Wallace Junior's mother was more forthright.
Yes, I was telling the police to stop. Don't shoot my son. Please don't shoot my son. They hate me no more. And they just shot me. It was wrong. It was deadly wrong.
Wallace reportedly had a lengthy criminal record, including convictions for assault and robbery, and at the time of his death was awaiting trial for allegedly threatening to shoot a woman. Police said that when he was fatally shot, he was wielding a knife that he refused to drop. But some protesters were adamant that racism and a lack of training on the part of the police led unnecessarily to Wallace's death.
You cannot retrain hatred. How can I tell a younger man, well, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that, when all he can see is bam, 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 bam.
It was a color thing, but as you can see, it's no longer that. This is like affecting everybody. Everybody's affected by it because that could have been anybody's child. In a different neighborhood where it's less crime and things of that nature, that situation probably would have been handled a lot differently.
Pennsylvania Governor Tom Wolf announced the deployment of several hundred National Guard troops to Philadelphia as the city braces for further unrest.
For more on this, we're now joined by Joseph Hutchinson. He's a US civil rights lawyer currently based here in Berlin. Joseph, sending in troops sounds very extreme. Is that necessary, and is it even legal?
So necessary, I don't think so, but legal, definitely. So typically when we see governors who have the executive authority in their states calling in the National Guard, it's usually more for kind of like natural disasters. So whenever you have hurricanes, for example, then the National Guard might be called in to help with things like that. What the Governor Wolf is doing in this instance, though, is showing that the defense of property is more important than the defense of life. So I think it's out of concern that there would be looting or violent protests that he's preactively called in the National Guard, even though it doesn't really seem to be much of an emergency that would typically warrant it.
Joseph, how do you gauge this? Is this likely to cause protests like we saw after the killing of George Floyd?
I think the problem that we're noticing in the States is that, and we heard it in the segment, that this man, Walter Wallace Jr., was armed. There are reports of his prior criminal record. And unfortunately, what we see is what we call respectability politics in the United States. For Black victims of crime to be treated with empathy and respect, they typically have to be, the most innocent person you could ever imagine. So I think the difference here with George Floyd's killing is that, yes, he was holding a knife, but I think what activists are still pointing out is, just because he was holding a knife does not mean he should have been shot. It certainly shouldn't have been shot fatally. So I think for this to have the same kind of impact, and I think that's why people are taking to the streets in Philadelphia, because they can see what's happening. But unfortunately, there is that hurdle to get over that people might not, in this instance, be able to view him with the same humanity.
You mentioned it earlier that he was fatally shot, and I think he was shot multiple times for just wielding a knife. That's what I call excessive force, isn't it? And does the police need to be reformed and especially retrained? And is this actually happening?
I think the problem, so in limited instances, there are, because the police are under local control, so not under federal oversight, you have some communities now realizing that the police are out of control, that the entire relationship between the police and the people needs to be revised. This is absolutely excessive use of force, but from a policeman's perspective, they're allowed to say, well, my life was in danger. I was allowed to do anything to protect myself. There's a long list of demands that need to take effect, but something I just want to point out, we've seen, there's video of this murder. We've seen them shoot him, but these individual police officers will almost certainly never be held accountable. And even if there is some financial settlement with the family, that's going to come out of taxpayer money.
Joseph Hutchinson, a US civil rights lawyer based here in Berlin. Thank you very much.
Thank you.